I recently heard someone say, it's not about doing your best, it's about doing what's required. Are they different? Very. Here's my take. Doing your best has an emotional component attached to it. It's subjective. What exactly is your best? Well, it's a story that you tell yourself. A narrative opening the door to limitation. I've always found that when we put our backs against the wall and venture into scenarios where it's essential that we get something done, we somehow always find a way. When we leave no plan B for ourselves, we are required to make plan A work. And so we do. It's a testament to both the resilience and power contained in the human spirit, as well as the reality that we can astound ourselves when we're unwilling to take no for an answer. That it's not the resources that are the problem. It's usually our unwillingness to move forward into the dark, our hesitance to try, explore, test, build, and rebuild. Actions that are surprisingly unrelated to one's best and have everything to do with accepting nothing less than an identified outcome. One of the reasons I fell in love with the sport of running is because it reinforced this notion in my life. It became the template with which I could repeatedly amaze myself. I talk a lot about earning confidence. And oh, how I earned it. Step by step, mile by mile, day by day, in the sun, in the rain, in the desert, in the woods, through city streets, all over the country and the world, I came to understand the relationship between the turbulence of now and the satisfaction of later. It was on those days I'd push beyond my usual level of comfort, when that cloud of pain and agony would hover over me. I couldn't even really point to where my body hurt. It just all seemed to come together into this one giant hell, and to learn that I could not only endure that, but grow in those moments. To see myself rise above any preconceived notion or understanding of best in order to defeat my demons, conquer the day's objective, it changes the way you see yourself in the world. Now, could onlookers be tempted to call these self-created goals arbitrary, even unnecessary? Sure, and I get why they would, but I'd also completely disagree. Those days were a masterclass in doing what is necessary. Realizing that when you shut your rational brain off, and don't give your mind a chance to talk your body out of it, you can see just how powerful you are. You realize that story of your best is nothing more than a house built on sand. Life is not about that story you've told yourself. It's not about your personal records and peak performances, what you think you can do or how far you think you might be able to go. It's about not stopping in the moments when it hurts. Doing what is required, a decision that compounds over time to create what was once impossible. One of my favorite quotes is by Admiral William McRaven, an absolute hero of mine. And funny enough, he says, if you want to change the world, you must be your very best in your darkest moments. And what a beautiful idea, to rise when life presents its periods of turbulence. And sure, it may be a matter of semantics, but in those moments of darkness, I think of your best, not in the traditional sense, not as a personal metric, but as a willingness to do what must be done, a removal of the spotlight from you altogether and instead pointed directly at the road ahead, at the task at hand. When you choose to make the journey not about what you can and cannot do, but instead make it about what must be done, The universe, as Paulo Coelho has so elegantly stated, conspires to make it happen. I think back to my journey, and at so many periods my best wasn't good enough. I was so lost and so overwhelmed that the only thing I could do was not stop moving. That was my superpower, simply trudge through the fear of things falling apart, the nagging pride and hurting ego. And what I learned was that life is no different than all those miles I'd put in running. How I felt, or what my previous capabilities were, what I deemed my best to be, it was all noise, it was all irrelevant. What was required was that I move forward through the chaos and to something better, and so I did. And in your world, so can you. The stories we tell ourselves are so powerful, and in many ways valuable in our journey through life. But there's one narrative that eliminates the necessity of so many others. You can get to the top of whatever mountain you are seeking to climb so long as you do not stop. So long as you let go of the limitations tied to your quote-unquote best and instead do what is required to get there. You'll see how adaptable and transformative that best really is, how it's a lagging indicator. It will take time, but you're capable of being patient. And it will have its moments of chaos, but you are capable of weathering those storms. It will present obstacles that leave you unclear, uncertain, sometimes unprepared, but you're capable of picking your head up and moving through that haze. What you know of yourself now is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of what you're capable of doing. And how far that goes will be determined not by putting a stake in the ground and calling it your personal best, but as Emerson has said, by hitching your wagon to a star and pulling yourself towards its light, a little bit at a time. I was talking to my friend on the phone this morning, and he's been on a very long journey. A lot of highs, a lot of lows, but now he's doing incredibly well. He's heavily invested in real estate, has a very successful business. I mean, you talk about a turnaround, he's it. And he says, Eddie, do you know what the best part of all this is? When I get up in the morning, I think, yes. I don't think, oh man, I wish I could sleep just a few more minutes. I don't wish for a little longer in bed. I think, yes. And I found that moving. If that's not peak living, I don't know what is. The second your eyes open to be excited about what's to come, right? And so I asked him, Tom, you know, what's the biggest mental change you made in your life that brought that about? And he said, essentially, this is a term used a lot by Dan Sullivan. He says, I learned to always be the buyer. Now, I'm just starting reading Sullivan's books, so I'm not too familiar with the idea. I said, Tom, can you expand upon that a little bit? Paraphrasing, he said, he started to look at life like he was worthy of it, like he was the decision maker, right? And I don't know if you've been there, I certainly have, where it's like, man, I hope this person accepts me. I hope they hire me. I hope I can be included. Now it's an existence of constantly selling yourself. But when you make that mental shift of instead saying, I have value to add to this person, I am the buyer here, you empower yourself, right? A buyer cannot get rejected. Instead of walking around hoping the world accepts you, it's having confidence in yourself and your ability. As my 8th grade teacher, Mr. Betancourt, used to say when we were kids, the worst thing you can do is hold your hands up to the sky and hope something of value falls into them. The worst thing you can do is take the power out of your hands and outsource it to fate. Because the truth is, you do have value to add. There is change you're going to make in the world. There's a beautiful mark on humanity to be created by you. And there must come a time where you see that as a valuable resource. You're on a mission. And it's not about other people saying yes or no to you. It's, do you want to allow these people to come along with you on your mission? Not selling yourself, but buying the pieces that will comprise your greatness. Subtle shift, but also a powerful one. And the reality is, people respect it, right? That's the crazy thing. When you find the courage to dig deep and unlock that confidence in yourself, you get more of it from others. And this is from experience, right? I've never been the loudest guy in the room, not an attention seeker. It's easier for me to listen, right? But I find that when you live with conviction, the world around you conforms. Respect finds you. People will never believe in someone who doesn't believe in him or herself. And this is kind of an interesting note. A good friend of mine has helped do some booking on podcasts and events, right? And part of that's trying to get speakers and personalities to participate. You have to explain to them the value. And this is what I found amazing. He says a formal, well thought out letter stating the ins and outs, how grateful the host would be, how beneficial the experience would be, gets ignored 99 times out of 100. But a simple, hey, X is happening, gonna be incredible, give me a shout, we'll see how we can get you involved, gets responded to way more often. Why? Because you're not selling, you're buying, right? People want to be around those who live with conviction, who have value to add. So make that clear, right? Instead of writing out those 4-paragraph emails asking the world for answers, for assistance. Now, you weren't put here to wait for permission, to tiptoe through life and not make any mistakes. You weren't put here to impress others or be accepted by those around you. You're here to live life on your terms, to make magic, to enjoy the passing moments with the ones you love, spent how you choose to spend them. Never forget how much you mean and how valuable you are. Never forget that you have every right to wake up and say yes. I get out of bed today. I get to chase my dream and bring along with me the people and things that are worthy of the pursuit. That's not arrogance. That's confidence. That's not existing. That's living. In a world of conformity, of please take what I have to offer, in a world of concession, in a world of I don't want to but okay, you have to get to the yes. You have to become the buyer, not only in each specific exchange, but the buyer of a destiny that belongs to you. Recently, I was thinking about something a friend of mine named Tom told me a few years back. He owns a company in Oklahoma City and was telling me about how someone he'd hired essentially stole from him. And the first question that came to my mind as he was telling the story was, okay, what are you going to do about it? And I asked him the question, and he was kind of quiet for a second, and then asked in his southern accent, Eddie, if a snake bites you, are you going to chase it into the woods to get your revenge? Or are you going to get the medical attention required to save yourself? Basically, are you going to focus on the past or on what to do from here forward, right? Basically, he cut ties with the person but had moved on, was already thinking about next steps that were best for him, his family, and his business. And I can tell you, since hearing that, it's become an incredibly valuable idea in my life. Especially as you realize that there will never be a shortage of problems. You do what you can to avoid them. You try to steer clear when possible, but adversity will always be a factor. It's about knowing that and stepping into it regardless. It's something that's always intertwined in our development, and I find value in asking myself, is this action I'm about to take conducive to my growth and my happiness, or am I just chasing snakes? Does this just feel good in the short term because I'm angry or I've been wronged or something along those lines? Especially since most harm inflicted on others derive from incompetence, not malice, and I truly believe that. I think very frequently we attribute sinister motives to others when 99% of the time it's, sheer stupidity. It's imperfect humans trying to navigate an often complex world. We make mistakes. Now, I'm not suggesting you don't stand up for yourself when you've been wronged or slighted. Of course you should. But the magic is in not personalizing the situation. Right? Possessing the emotional IQ to understand, hey, look, it's not about me, but whether I can salvage this situation from here. And that depends solely on how I choose to look at it. Emerson wrote, "People do not seem to realize that their opinion of the world is also a confession of their character." And what a powerful point. The flexibility and the leeway available to us when it comes to making sense of the world speaks to not how the world is, but how the onlooker thinks and interprets. Depersonalizing the situation is one of the greatest superpowers at our disposal. When you're angry and accusatory, you will, as Tom put it, end up chasing snakes. You'll end up breaking things that will need to be rebuilt and uttering words you'll wish you'd never spoken. But the 5 seconds required to pause, to collect yourself, and realize that you're in control is everything. The ability to see the person, the situation, or the world not as an adversary stacked against you, but as an inevitable challenge that must be managed. So how will you choose to manage it? How will you choose to arrange the pieces? And by the way, I'm fully aware a constant theme for my speeches and podcasts and videos is the act of pointing not out at the world, but in at ourselves. My responsibility, my fault, my problem to deal with. I understand just how heavy that is, how hard that can be. Especially when deflecting blame often feels like it would just be a tremendous weight off of our shoulders, when revenge feels like the easy, intuitive move. But again, it's short-term relief. To truly grow, to find the calm and happiness and meaning we long for, it's the internal relationship with ourselves that matters most. It's the ability to say, I may not have created this, or even, I may have made the mistakes that brought this to life, but I can't fix it until I look at both the situation and my own reflection and proclaim it's mine now. Let the past be the past. Now it's me and the present. And as far as I'm concerned, the present and opportunity, they are always one in the same, so long as we choose to see it that way. It's not what you look at, it's what you see over and over and over again. Is it happening to you, Or for you, is it a problem or an opportunity, a setback or a chance to reset? I want to bring to light a story, one that I've told before, but it's so perfectly representative of the conversation. Jim Rohn talking about two brothers in an abusive household. Alcoholic father, terrible childhoods. They grow up and both of the sons have families of their own. One is the exact same as his father. He's abusive and he's angry. And the other one is a great father. He's kind, he's loving, he's supportive. And when asked why, the abusive brother replies, "Look at my childhood, right? How could you blame me for this?" The other brother, when asked, responds, "Look at my childhood, right? How could I let myself treat my family the same way?" And in a way, one spent his life chasing snakes, bitter, resentful. The other one asked, "Well, that was terrible, but what can I do to right the wrong?" One personalized it, the other used it as a lever or stepping stone. And this is, of course, a simplification, but I believe every struggle we face in our lives at its core contains some element of this choice. From the little things to the big things, where do I go from here? It's mine now, and I can choose whether to make it better or worse. Chase the snake into the woods or march forward to find the value and right the ship. Remember that when it's hardest, when you least want to. Remember that the present contains every single thing you need to begin a journey to recovery, to growth, to contentment and meaning. You, on your end, though, need to be willing to slow down the moment. Need to be willing to collect yourself and give yourself permission to take that necessary and appropriate step. There are always footsteps behind you. It's an idea I talked about years ago. And it stemmed from a quote from Mark Cuban. He says, "Look, you need to be working 24/7 like there is someone constantly around the clock working to take it all away from you." And I strongly believe in that notion. I think there's a lot of value in that understanding. It's a way to help you level up, right? Because the idea is, in life, in the world we live in, there is no cap on what we can be doing. And short of driving yourself crazy, there's value in the understanding that the place you arrived at, the place you said, "All right, I did my best, that was my limit, that was the peak," maybe it was extraordinary, maybe it was progress, but it was not your maximum. Why? Because that word means nothing. When used in the context of human potential, it's an infinite thing. You can't put a finger on someone's maximum, on someone's limit, on someone reaching their full potential. It's an arbitrary number, right? And so that was the idea. Long story short, I was running and I would run around the Charles River in Boston, and I would really excite myself. I would get worked up and force myself to dig deep when I saw, someone run by me, or even the idea that someone would. It helped me, when I wasn't feeling my best, to suck it up and push myself. And so there was value there, no question. But I had an epiphany the other day as I was, you guessed it, running. And it's related to the concept in The Sound of Footsteps. And I'm not sure if it's a parallel idea, maybe a progression, or maybe it's the result of 5 years, 6 years since writing that, immersed in the world of entrepreneurship and speaking and being a creator on YouTube and on these platforms, you learn a lot about yourself. And this particular situation helped me realize that. I was doing a 9-mile run down A1A in South Florida, it's one of my favorite places to run because it's just straight shot, straight up. You don't have to think. You can just one foot in front of the other and, enjoy the run. And as I've been, working my way back into running shape, coming back from an injury, it's been beautiful. And so I'm a few miles into this run, and sure enough, someone blows by me, probably going at a 5.5, 6 minute pace, right? And my first instinct is, whoa, Ed, time to level up, man. What are you doing? Like, that's not even close, right? Sound of footsteps. Someone was behind you, someone's working harder, someone's going faster, there they go, here you are. And then I had this realization, a very common sense realization. You're gonna see that dude and pass him a mile up the road. Because unless he is an incredible athlete, that's not maintainable. You are going at a slower pace, but you're going further, and you will pass him. And then I had a second thought, which was, who the hell cares? The sort of old notion that the speed of others is some way related to you can be troubling, right? And again, there is no right or wrong, left or right, good or bad. The world exists in this gray area. And I believe that if you can find value in something, utilize it. If you're someone that gets motivated by that type of thing, sometimes I am, a lot of the time I am, green light, use it. But I think that highlighted a trap that I've fallen into, that I think a lot of us fall into. We hear those footsteps. We see that 6-minute miler go by us. And we think it's somehow reflective of us in our journey, or correlated to where we're going, or says something about us, when in reality, it means nothing. Like there's a it's comical that I'm sitting here even talking about it right now, right? Because the relationship between my goals and his goals are none. But that's the world we live in, right? That's the social media world of highlight reels, of seeing people's 6-minute sprints and saying, oh my God, I'm running it at 8.5. It's like, yeah, well, 1, he went 1 mile, you're going 9. 2, you're running different races. 3, your finish line is all that matters. And it really hit home, because in this maybe 6-year stretch, the biggest mistakes I've made, and I never shy away from admitting this, they're when I had that sense of panic and anxiety due to other people talking about things that work for them, their success. This is the way to get what you want. Look what I did. Look how I achieve A, B, and C. You want the answer? Here's the answer. And I'd look in the mirror and I'd think, well, hell, I'm going slower than this. I'm not there, right? I'm not doing what they're doing. And they had a little bit of success there, right? Better change my plan, better pivot, better integrate, their steps, their processes. And that's always when I get in trouble. That's always when I have to take a step back and say, Ed, what are you? This is not you. You had a plan. You had a finish line. You had an idea that you believed in. And now what are you doing? Right? And I'd have to reel it back in. And this happened a few times, right? Because sometimes it's not as obvious. Sometimes you forget your value. what you're giving to the world, and what you love to do, right? If you're going down a highway, there are a lot of exits. There are a lot of people saying this is where you need to get off. This is where, your answers are. This is what he or she did, and look how successful they are. That's the exact same thing as looking at that guy speeding down A1A at a 6-minute mile pace and feeling any level of inadequacy. What he's doing and where he's going is not what you're doing, and it's not where you're going. And so I had a lot of time to have a conversation with myself, but that's exactly what I did. I had a tough conversation with myself. You've changed. You've changed since you wrote that speech, and that's a beautiful thing because, my friend, if you're not changing, you're not learning, you are dying. And there's a time and a place, again, for everything. Yeah, if you're looking around and everyone's working harder than you, hey, maybe that's an indicator. Maybe you need to ask yourself the question, what am I capable of? Am I pushing myself in that direction? Or have I accepted some type of mediocrity? Right? But they are not you. And in today's world, I want you to remember that. Because most of our interactions, they are digital. They are curated snippets, pictures, videos, concepts that are just not reflective of reality, especially online, right? I've been able to see the curtain pulled back on so many things, and it's like nothing is what it seems to be. People are not who they claim they are, right? And this is not some conspiracy that like there's all these strings being pulled in the background, but what I'm saying is no one presents life as it is. They present life as they want it to be seen. And the difference between those two things is substantial, I promise. And so when you are looking to your left, you're looking to your right, you're comparing it to yourself, and you feel any level of inadequacy, remember that you are going down a road that is valuable, that means something to you. You have your finish line, and you're going to get there. Don't be misguided, by these short half-mile sprints or whatever they are. Don't be misguided. Don't be distracted by anything but where you're going. Because I promise, if you just move forward, if you believe in your pursuit and trust yourself to get there, if you're willing to adapt and grow, if you're aware enough to understand that you'll make mistakes, you'll learn from them, and you'll pick up the pieces, the only adversary you have is yourself. Nothing else matters. So let's get that finish line. There has to come a time when it's now or never. Where you look at your reflection and realize that the cost of waiting is far more expensive than the cost of stepping out into the vast unknown. In every journey, that's when life effectively starts. But here's why this is so tricky. What's caught me off guard so many times in my life, it's the many shapes that waiting takes. See, waiting is not always sitting there and doing nothing, not at all. Sometimes waiting is just the bare minimum. It's moving forward so slightly and so slowly that you can essentially trick yourself into thinking that you're progressing, into thinking you're making it happen. When if you really stopped and looked, if you were honest with yourself, if you really took a second to review, to analyze, you'd see that you're leaving almost everything on the table. You're not creating progress. You're dancing with the idea of progress. Sometimes waiting can mean just going fast enough to not have to look at the fear you're hiding behind. That's reality, right? I think it's a very normal thing, but I also think life is too short for normalcy. I think we can do better than normal. And I believe with all my heart and soul that the world has for us the spectacular. Sitting there on the top shelf, waiting for those who can acquire the self-belief and the awareness to reach out and grab it. And how crazy a thought to realize that we could have been sitting next to the very thing we've needed for days, months, years, but never taught ourselves to extend our hands and reach. When I look back, the most important moments in my life were not tangible acquisition, and see the flashy things that try and capture our attention, right? The money, the condos, even social media growth, business growth, whatever it is you're working towards. Right? Those things are wonderful. They are benchmarks that hopefully align with your North Star, but they are not the difference makers. Not at all, right? They were the byproduct of what really mattered. They weren't the moments that moved the needle. My greatest moments were mental shifts, cognitive transformations. That's why I do this for a living. I see how much can change when we step back and look at life just a little differently. It was my realizing that I was demanding too little of myself. That the world won't see greatness in me until I see it in me. That shift that pushed me to demand more of myself, seek bigger challenges, value my work to a greater extent, charge more for my services. And that mental shift is what made some of those externalities possible. It's realizing that if you want it, more is on the table. That yesterday doesn't define you. That it's never too late to begin again. That everything you need, you have, right? These are the ideas that truly change lives. They make the difference. And if we don't become aware of these things, we leave them in the rear view. We walk right by them. In other words, the most important moments of my life were when someone or something shook me and effectively said, hey, look around you. If this is what you want, fine, enjoy, right? But for your information, there is more out there. And if you step up just a little, if you do just a little more, if you pivot and come at this thing a little bit differently, you will further that reach. You'll create another ripple effect that will transform your life. But we must stop and look around. A good friend of mine, and this is just the other day, right? We're having lunch, we're talking about marketing, and we always joke that marketing is just a part of the business that I don't particularly enjoy, right? Necessary, but not my favorite. And we're going through kind of different strategies, ideas, and he presents one, and I say something like, I don't need to do that. It seems a little over the top. And unfiltered, he goes, man, you're hurting your reach. Like, what good is that metaphorical restaurant that's not on anyone's radar? You're going to be the best pizza shop that no one knows about. And it just kind of hit me, right? It's like, man, I needed to see that differently. Maybe there's room to be a little more aggressive. Again, one example of many. And not every time is the idea or opportunity the right one or necessary one, right? But at least you stopped. At least you thought about it. At least you contrasted where you are with the potential upside of doing something differently. That is where we leave opportunity on the table. We most often, myself included, paint regret as this, the result of this blatant walking away from something. A deliberate declaration, sort of a, oh no, I'm not doing that, no way. And sure, sometimes that's the case, right? Sometimes we're cognizant of our fear and decline to move forward, but I wonder how often our neglect or refusal is softer, more subtle. I wonder how much of our regret comes from simply not stopping and looking around, not letting in alternative points of view that challenge us and force us to level up. How much of our regret comes from simply not understanding how short life is and how quickly time passes us by. And if we don't create some abrupt change in our day-to-day, if we don't manufacture some momentum in our lives, even when it feels least ideal to do so, the ship we needed to be on will sail away without us. So think back to your hardest days. Even the ones that took you out, that brought you to your knees, and realize that you survived every single one of them. You have, for years, been acquiring the armor, piece by piece, to move into something bigger. You've been learning, you've been evolving. But today, what about sitting down with yourself and having the discussion you don't want to have, but need to have? What about asking if it's time to leap where you once stepped, to run where you once walked? What about taking a good look around and asking why you're living in ways that don't serve you? Why you're conceding so much of what matters? Again, the evolution you want and need is there. It's always there, and that's the key takeaway here. It will always exist. But the question is, will your commitment to stop, to think, and to reach for it be there? Years from now, looking back, I think we'll find that our willingness to ask those questions mattered more than we could have ever imagined. That silence often implies the lack of adversity needed to evolve. Because the reality you want, it doesn't come to you. You must go to it. And that means reapproaching today's normalcy and comfort, seeing those things for what they are, a continuation of the status quo. Nothing changes until you change. So take a look around, examine those pillars holding up your worldview. Not once, but over and over again. And if one, many, or all of them must be knocked down, then so be it. The point here is that you can build. The point here is that life happens on your terms, whether you realize it or not. That doing nothing is accepting what things are. It's a head nod and a thumbs up to reality as is. So again, ask yourself what you want out of life. And if you are missing that mark, tear down what must be torn down. It might be hard now. It might hurt now. It might be uncomfortable now, but when you're eventually standing upon an existence that aligns with who you are and what you want, you'll see how necessary it all was. How it was there the whole time. And thank God you found it within yourself to reach out and take it. Dear Keeper of Dreams, I've written before, but 10 years ago you looked different. Way different. In 2013, it was impossible to miss you. You stood out like a sore thumb. Everywhere I looked, there you were. Your goal was to intimidate. Your power was in crying out worst case scenarios and pointing me to that fear that always seemed to be buried just beneath the surface. You sure were something. And a little bit of time's passed, Keeper of Dreams. It's safe to say you're still there, perhaps as strong as ever, but you're certainly not the same. As I've evolved, so have you. A little more subtle, a little more camouflaged, a little more strategic. See, back then when things were chaotic, when the wheels were coming off the wagon, all you had to do was scream. All you had to do was wave your hands in the air and tell me the things I wanted were way too dangerous. That getting them would hurt way more than the status quo. All you had to do was tell me I'd be better off looking out the window for the rest of my life wondering what could have been. Because at least I'd be safe. Suffering by that window is far easier than suffering out in the big, bad world. That was your pitch. And for a while it worked. But ultimately, the pain of staying was too much. The curiosity too great. I had to know. I had to see if I could build a world that meant something to me. Keeper of Dreams, you failed in holding me down. You lost. At least back then. But as we grow, as the game progresses and the rules change, Keeper of Dreams, so have your tactics. You've improved. You don't attempt to blatantly scare me anymore. Your objective isn't to instill fear out in the open or make me tremble at the thought of an unknown tomorrow. No, your objective is to distract me with the now. It's to make it so that I don't think about tomorrow at all. You want me to be so consumed with what I have now that I get lost in it, to relish in the certainty I've created. You hope I stay comfortable. Because Keeper of Dreams, nothing is so dangerous as comfort, and you know that. You know it would be both reasonable and easy to focus on maintaining and not growing, to preserve and not to expand. Each chapter in the Book of Life has its seasons. And now it appears we're in a different kind of winter. It's not as cold, it's not as dark as 2013. I could theoretically now sit by a fire and wait this thing out, and how happy you'd be to hear that, Keeper of Dreams. The thought of me numb and content. You want nothing more than to be that governing body that assigns trivial and meaningless tasks that keep me preoccupied in the now while everything good sails away. But Keeper of Dreams, you'll fail. You'll fail again and again. You will continuously come up short. As Will Durant wrote, empires are stoic in their ascent and Epicurean in their demise. People are no different. I won't be tempted by the luxuries of an easier existence when times are good, just like I won't be held down by the discomfort when they are not. Urgency will be manufactured. Greatness will be pulled from the earth, resilience shaped from the chaos that surrounds me. Know that I will always be moving forward, despite your every wish and your every effort. Not because I'm ungrateful for the now, but because for this life I am beyond grateful, so indebted that I want to capture all its magnificence and leave it better than I found it. As a friend of mine recently said, I want that dash on my tombstone to represent courage, a dream realized. Keeper of dreams, in aiming to keep me down, you propelled me forward. You weren't my undoing, but my incentive to grow. And by the way, that will be how this story ends. Higher and higher until all that's left is your ashes and your attempt that you tried, that you really did. But you didn't keep any dreams, you helped give them life. And what a twist in the story. Keeper of dreams, thank you. I simply couldn't have done it without you. Sometimes it's what we don't say that echoes the loudest. What we don't do that has the greatest consequences. Where we don't go that ultimately gets us lost. I remember as a teenager applying to college. I was working on the admissions essay. I was brainstorming with my grandmother, talking over possible topics and approaches. And she read me this quote that's sometimes attributed to Mark Twain, but that's beside the point. The quote states, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor. Catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. I thought this was the perfect bridge to the next chapter in my life. The latest horizon, the newest adventure. I thought it was incredible, and it was. It was exactly what I needed, and so on to that next adventure I went. But here's the thing. As life unfolded, this equation somehow transformed from exploration and dreaming and discovery into the question, well, what am I supposed to do? Somehow, without my paying attention, life turned into a checklist, a question I couldn't get wrong, a test I needed to make sure I didn't fail. It's amazing how quickly we forget the infinite breadth of life because we're focusing on the dotted line before us, the one we're supposed to walk. Sometimes we're so fixated on what the expectation is that we don't ask ourselves where these expectations are coming from. Who is so significant and wise that they know what's best for you to a greater extent than you do? See how that's an important question, and also one you can lose in your periphery as you follow that dotted line before you. When you have a destination in mind, hopes, dreams, ambitions, well, that's an adventure. When someone else has a destination in mind for you, whether this authority is imaginary or not, that's obedience. And sometimes the greatest disservice we can do to ourselves is to not stop and think, to not stop and ask ourselves where we're going and why. Do you remember when you were a child and you got into trouble, right? Sometimes you'd get sent to your room. And for me, this was agony. When it was punishment, I wanted to be anywhere but confined within those walls. I hated being sent to my room. And then finally, the door would open. My parents would say, Eddie, you can come out now. I'd go outside, play basketball for a little bit, and then oftentimes I'd find myself right back in my room. Happy, playing with my toys, whatever I was doing, not a care in the world. And it's like, what changed? Nothing but the context. Same me, same room, same toys, same whatever I was doing. It was, however, no longer a punishment. And I think this realization is worth exploring. We may not realize, we may not even be able to articulate it, But I think we long for control over our lives. We long to walk our own path. And in this situation, the path led me right back to where I was. Sometimes, though, the path leads us in the opposite direction, far away to distant worlds. The end destination is not as important as the fact that we chose it. That we asked ourselves why, and that we believe in the answer and immerse ourselves in its execution. So when Mark Twain talks about the things that we don't do holding more weight in our hearts, it's because those things we tend to skip over are often the very things that breathe life into our souls. We'll go to school to get good grades, to get a 9-to-5, to get a promotion, to get a mortgage on a home. But the audacity to open that photography studio, the nerve to think you could rent a van and travel the country, the delusion to think you could start that routine that will get you in the physical shape you've always dreamed of. See, we're lucky and fortunate to have the things that we have. The quality of life we lead now far exceeds those that came before us. Life is convenient, incredibly convenient. But what is convenience if it comes at the expense of purpose, of meaning in life? Because that's what steers the ship. A crisis of meaning ultimately mitigates everything else. There is no exploration without meaning. And without exploration, tomorrow becomes a repetition of today, not an evolution of today. And what's incredible, truly incredible, is that our purpose can be rediscovered, our paths redefined. How? By having a long conversation with, you guessed it, yourself. By putting the phone in another room, by disconnecting the Wi-Fi and spending time with you. Something along the lines of, dear self, what matters to me in this world? Where am I going right now? Is where I'm going right now aligned with what matters to me in this world? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes no. Great, but what we have now is a foundation to work off of. An awareness that should be celebrated, that you created. It's so easy to walk through life and never have that conversation. It's so easy to sleepwalk to the tune of someone else's song, the beat of other people's drums. But when you open your eyes, you see the correlation between your thoughts and your actions and your reality. You realize that when you wake up, that tendency to ask yourself what you have to do today, to reflect on your problems, those questions you assumed were normal, that you never gave much thought to. Well, now you'll see you can dismantle that notion. Now you'll see that if you can ask yourself what you have to do, you can just as easily ask yourself what you want to do, what you get to do, what life is inviting you to do. If you can reflect on your problems, you are just as capable of reflecting on the opportunity at your fingertips. If you can spend time dwelling on whether you're walking the obligatory dotted line that's been laid out in front of you, you're just as capable of redrawing that line and allowing it to pull you into a new dimension. Listen again, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bow lines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover. Explore, but for you. Wander down those paths that have for so long piqued your curiosity. Try things you once felt like other people were entitled to, but you'd never given yourself permission. Be that for yourself, because no one will come up to you and randomly give you that green light. Dream, because without building your castles in the air, as Thoreau calls them, you live your entire life on the ground. You'll never hit targets that you don't create. And sure, there'll be a time that only you see the destination. Great, that's life, but with each step forward, as it becomes more real for you, it will make sense to others as well. Trust each step like it is in and of itself a miracle. And you'll find in time that that's exactly what each step was. And lastly, discover. Discover who you are, what you're capable of becoming. As Emerson said, to be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. To forge your own path, build your own life, stay true to your own heart is courage. So sail away, because you have the ability, because you are strong enough, and because the story you're about to write doesn't continue on until you turn the page on today's chapter.